this can happen, where things are so wonderful, but we don't realize how caught we are in it. We don't realize how enslaved we are to it until it starts breaking down. And then there can be, if you have a spiritual mindset, if you have a sense of being on a spiritual path, there can be a sense of, I just have to step away from all of this, whatever this is, right? Fill in the blank. But whatever it is, it has to do with life situation, with worldliness, with some kind of stuff that happens in time. And there can be a sense of wanting to withdraw, become a renunciate. It doesn't mean that we all become real renunciates, but there can be that desire anyway to just kind of turn away and withdraw. So that's kind of an initial stage that many people experience. Disappointment, disillusionment with things. And then he has this experience at the burning bush that's telling him to, no, go back into it and be a positive force within it. Don't just go back into it enjoying the life of a prince. Go back into it and try to work on the thing that disillusioned you in it. Make it better. Bring blessing to the situation. In the Tanya, which is a Hasidic mystical work, it calls this kind of movement Ratz V'Shuv. It's taking that term from the Sefer Yetzirah, which is one of the oldest Kabbalistic works. We don't really know when it was written, maybe around the 7th century, 5th century, who knows. It claims to have been written by Avraham. So Ratz V'Shuv means running and returning. And in that context, it talks about running as being a desire for transcendence, for letting go of life situations of the world and dwelling in the experience of the eternal. In the Tanya, that's accomplished through contemplation and prayer. So what we're doing right now is a kind of contemplation. We're talking about it, bringing it into consciousness. But then there's the shuv, which means returning back into all the mishigas of life, but with this renewed connection with the eternal in order to do something here. So that's the insight, we might say, that Moses has at the burning bush. The divine voice from the bush is telling him, no, you have to go back. And then he says, well, but what do I do? And the voice says, well, you go talk to Pharaoh. So that's very interesting. Maybe it wouldn't have occurred to him to go right to the source. Like, how do I deal with this huge mess? Well, go to Pharaoh. Pharaoh is the source. So in the spiritual sense, in the metaphorical sense, Pharaoh can represent the sense of me that's experiencing the distress. So when we experience distress, the automatic reaction is to blame it on the circumstance, right? There's this bad circumstance that's happening. It's causing me distress. Let me get away from it. But then once you have a little time away from it, it may occur to you, you know what? The real root of the problem, we don't have to call it a problem, but like the real issue here, the real challenge here is not the situation, it's the me in the situation. It's how I react to it. It's how I respond to it. It's how I think of it. And that's what feels constrictive and imprisoning about the situation. Sure, there's challenges in the world. There's things that happen that are not desirable that we have to deal with. But the root of the thing that we have to kind of work with first, if we want to transcend the problems in a spiritual sense, as opposed to just fixing things temporarily, then we have to kind of come right to the source, which is Pharaoh, represented by Pharaoh. So God says, go right to the source. Go to Pharaoh and talk to him. And Moses says, but I can't. I'm not a speaker. I'm not an orator. And we talked about last week, actually, there's a few different responses that the divine voice says then to Moses. One of them is, Anochi Ehyeh imach. I will be with you. Like, you don't have to worry about it. Don't worry about it. Don't think that you, Moses, have to have the skills to deal with Pharaoh. You already have it because the divine is with you in some sense. And that's one of the names of God too. Ehyeh means I will be, meaning there's this presence, there's this beingness that's inherently there, always with you. Don't worry about it. So in this Parsha, God says something else that's really interesting. It's a wonderful phrase. God says, or the voice of the divine says, Netaticha Elohim leFaro. It's a very strange construction. Netaticha Elohim leFaro. Netaticha means I have given you or gifted you. Elohim means the divine, means God, to Pharaoh. So it's usually translated as I have made you a god over Pharaoh. And then it says, Ve'aharon achicha yihyeh neviecha. And Aaron, your brother, will be your prophet. So heretical. Oh my God. Netaticha Elohim leFaro. I have made you, or I will make you, I am making you a god over Pharaoh. But it doesn't say making, because the verb for making is a different verb. It's saying something which is hard to translate in English. It's saying I am giving you. It's like I'm gifting you to be God over Pharaoh. So what's the hint here? If we understand Pharaoh as being ourself, right? The Pharaoh is the me in the sense of the lowercase m, the sense of me with my opinions and my reactions, my feelings, my thoughts, my opinions, my particular conditioning from the past. That's the Pharaoh. And we may go through all of life without ever noticing, actually there's this other dimension to me, which is not just bigger than that, but infinitely bigger than that. It's actually Elohim. It's actually divinity. And this divinity is leFaro, meaning that it is that which perceives the Pharaoh. Normally we think we don't say Pharaoh in our mind, but we think I am me. I am these thoughts, I am this body, I am these opinions, I am these reactions. We don't say I feel anger arising. That's a good habit to get into. It's a beautiful meditation in real life. I feel anger arising, as opposed to I'm angry. Because when you use that language, I am angry, you're affirming your identity with the anger. And when you say I feel anger arising, then you are the space of consciousness that's aware of the anger. And in doing that, the point isn't the anger. The point is I feel. I am the feeling sense. I am the field of awareness, which here in this verse is being called Elohim. Why is it Elohim? Well, because God implies superior to, transcendent of, beyond, right? And that's what we are. We are actually beyond what we normally think of as ourselves. And that's the whole point of this practice of presence and meditation, is to know yourself. First of all, before you start dealing with fixing things in the world, to fix the most root core issue, which is just to know yourself. It's not really fixing, it's not doing something, it's just being aware, it's just knowing yourself. So the second part of that verse says, Ve'aharon avicha yihyeh neviecha. Aaron, your brother, will be your prophet. So what does that mean? Again, if we're trying to deal with ourselves, with our sense of self, with the ego sense of self, as an ego, then we can't deal with it. Right? We have to know ourselves as beyond it. And the me that's beyond it, that bigger I, that field of awareness, is related to and connected with everything we say and do, but it's also separate, meaning like when we stop doing everything and we just sit, which we're going to do in a little bit, we're just going to stop and we're going to sit, we be in the silence, then that field of consciousness is there. So like right now I'm talking, Brian, the guy who does workshops, is talking, right? But the words are not constructed by Brian, the teacher of workshops. In other words, Brian, teacher of workshops, is kind of just, my job is to just kind of be receptive and allow the words to arise out of that field. And so this is Moses and Aaron. Moses, in this sense, Moshe, meaning drawn from the water, meaning the water is formless. Identities, beings, things come out of the formless and come into being. And Aaron represents the character, the one who's doing things. Okay, so in the verse there and in the story, there's a hint about how to relate to ourselves and our experience. To know ourselves as this vast field out of which our words are arising. And we don't have to worry about it too much. What am I going to say? Don't worry, because it's not me. It's the totality of being that's arising and manifesting as this situation.